Here's a remarkable, unique coin that's right up my alley. It's a rather large 2-ounce silver coin. It's the second issued in the series called the Alchemists, dedicated to famous alchemists. The first was Nicholas Flamel and the Philosopher's Stone. This is Dr. John Dee. It's partially gilded, very high relief and antique finish with a Black Swarovski Crystal in the center. It's got a themed case, beautiful gold etching on the box with a magnet velvet enclosed case, and then a protective slip with the same gold embossed images. But this coin is really special to me. There's only 500 of these. Incredible. I mean, even the edge is a 3D printing of a snake. The ouroboros. I did a video on the ouroboros a while ago. It's an ancient symbol depicting the snake or a dragon eating its own tail. The symbol entered Western tradition via ancient Egypt iconography and Greek magical traditions. It's often interpreted as a symbol for the eternal cyclical events, renewal, or the cycles of life, death, and rebirth. Even the transmigration of souls, and it's a fertility symbol in some religions. That's John Dee there, of course. I'll talk about him soon. And this complex mystical symbol is called the Sigillum de Aemeth. It's a magical diagram composed of 2 circles, a pentagram, 2 heptagons, and a heptagram. Was used by John Dee to contact non-human sources of intelligence that he called angels and demons, as well as develop a universal language that he called the Enochian language. So who is John Dee? He was born in 1527. He lived to be about 81. He was an English mathematician, cartographer, astronomer, navigational genius, teacher, encryptologist, astrologist, hermetic philosopher, occultist, alchemist, and a spy for the Queen Elizabeth, who called Dee my ubiquitous eyes, my noble intelligentsia. Dee, it's interesting to note, John Dee signed his name 007, which are numbers based on gematria. So the whole series 007 was basically inspired by this guy. He entered St. John's College, Cambridge in 1542, age 15, and he graduated early. His abilities recognized, he became an original fellow of Trinity College in Cambridge on its foundation by Henry VIII in 1546 at the age of 19. So he was a savant genius from birth. He promoted the science of navigation and cartography. He owned an important collection of maps, globes, astronomical instruments. He developed and invented new instruments and special navigational techniques. He selected pilots and trained them at navigation. He believed that mathematics was central to human learning and had a mystical understanding of math in the Pythagorean tradition. He became a chief advisor to Queen Elizabeth I. He had one of the largest libraries in all of England. He presented Queen Mary in 1556 with a visionary plan for preserving old books, manuscripts, records, and he founded a national library. Became the center of learning outside universities, considered the greatest library in England, and attracted scholars from all over the world. This guy was amazing. Most people don't know about him, but he's becoming kind of popular in cultural circles. In 1576, he wrote and published a book called The Perfect Art of Navigation, which advocated to the Queen to establish English colonies and create what he called the New World in North America. Francis Bacon referred to this as Atlantis. He called America Atlantis. Dee coined the term British Empire for the first time. He strongly advocated a policy of political and economical strengthening of England. He claimed that America was discovered 300 years before Christopher Columbus, intending thereby to boost England's right to the New World over Spain's. Years later, the Rosicrucian order claimed that Dee was one of their members, which is questionable because the RO didn't really exist at that time. However, these orders and secret societies have lineages that precede nomenclature. Even before terms like Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism existed, these lineages can be traced back to the time of Pythagoras and all the way back to the Egyptian Empire. Dee was a friend of Tycho Brahe and familiar with his work. He translated into English the work of Nicholas Copernicus. Many of his astronomical calculations were based on Copernican assumptions, and he applied Copernican theory to a problem of calendar reform. In 1583, he advised the Queen on a new Gregorian calendar. What a genius. In 1564, he wrote the epic Hermetic work called the Hieroglyphic Monad. It's an exhaustive Kabbalistic interpretation of glyph of his own design, meant to express the mystical unity of all creation, and he dedicated to Maximilian II, the Holy Roman Emperor. In 1570, in a mathematical preface to Henry Billinger's English translation of Euclid's Elements, argued for the importance of mathematics as an influence on all other arts and sciences. In 1582, he partnered with Edward Kelly, who Aleister Crowley claimed to be the reincarnation of, and his work took a serious and energetic turn towards supernatural as a means to acquire knowledge. He sought to contact spirits through the use of a scryer, crystals in a black mirror, which he thought would act as an intermediary between himself and the angels. He was convinced of the benefits that would be brought to mankind, and he recorded them in journals that exist to this day. Angels dictated several books to him in this way, in an angelic language that he deciphered and called the Enochian language. In 1587, a spiritual conference in Bohemia, his partner Kelly told Dee that the angel Uriel had ordered the two men to share all their possessions, including their wives, which they did. This, among other things, led to their dissolution. 9 months later, on February 28, 1588, a son was born to Dee's wife, whom Dee baptized Theodorus Thibonius Dee and raised him as his own. However, Dee was more interested in communicating with angels who believed he would help him solve the mysteries of heavens and earth in mathematics, optics, astrology, science, navigation. The British Museum now holds Dee's original speculum, or the mirror, and the obsidian Aztec cult object in the shape of a hand mirror. His wax seals, large elaborate decorative seal of God, and the 6-centimeter crystal sphere he used as the scry, and an engraved golden amulet are in the museum for observation to the public. 10 years later, after Dee's death, an antiquarian, Robert Cotton, bought land around Dee's house and began digging for papers and artifacts. He found several manuscripts, mainly dedicated to Dee's angelic communications, and his son gave these to the scholar Merrick Casaubon, who published them in 1659. Dee was married 3 times, had 8 kids. And I'm going to share a more kind of a brief scholarly discussion, as well as an incredibly scholarly description of how this mystical diagram called the Sigillum di Aemeth actually works. I'm going to put links to his work below the description. I highly recommend. He's got hundreds of videos that are free. He's a genius and a scholar, and he lives in Maui, and he kind of puts it in simple terms to describe how he used this diagram to contact non-human beings. You would think he was a madman, except he accomplished so much in his lifetime, gives tremendous credibility to everything he did. There's the lineage living now. All right, so give me a moment to just set this up.
Inviting me to talk today. I'm going to talk about John Dee, and I suspect many people know a lot about him already. He was a very learned mathematician, scientist, astronomer, philosopher, alchemist, astrologer, a teacher, a spy, and a communicator with demons and with angels. He was educated at St. John's, Cambridge, and later became a fellow of Trinity College, Cambridge. He was very well known about the court, not altogether loved and trusted by everyone, though he had his supporters. Lord Burleigh, for instance, was very much on his side, using him as a spy, we think. And the Queen also held him in very high regard, used him to divine good dates to do things on. She called him my noble intelligencer, most faithful Dee, and my ubiquitous eyes, again suggesting that he was used as a spy, both in England, because important foreign dignitaries came to see him and find out about his learning and his maths, and also abroad, where he was at courts in Bohemia and Czechoslovakia, etc. And so he was certainly regarded as a spy. He's a very strange man, and he's becoming very, very popular. There's some pop singer, I think, called Ghost Domain, who has had absolutely, I haven't seen the number now, but millions and 80 million hits with a pop song called John Dee. So
I'm going to play a little bit of that right now. Ghostamine is a white rapper. He got like 70 million hits on this. John Dee is in all kinds of pop culture now, both, rappers, and, when you see films of wizards, it's based on John Dee's life. Here's the rap song, just a piece of it.
Fuck everything, I'm gone. Leave it alone. Every time I get so close and it all gets blown. Don't play alone. Everybody think they know, but they all just clone. Marching alone. Really wanna give my skull a brand new home. But I won't though. I don't wanna get no good if I grin my flow. But in my soul, one fin the plane and the other one inferno. Messy, yo, I can be messing up all this and that's about so below. You damn bitch don't know what damn thing said. What the fuck you told? You cannot fuck with a level 10 mace, I go. I wake up in the morning feeling like I'm John Dee. Got my black magic book and draw a circle round me. Bitch, I wake up in the morning feeling like I'm not me. I'm a beast, I'm a killer, I'm a young Crowley. Bitch, I wake up in the morning feeling like I'm John Dee. Got my black magic book and draw a circle round me. Bitch, I wake up in the morning feeling like I'm not me. I'm a...
So anyway, you got a piece of that. And then, see if there's anything else.
It's becoming a subject of enormous interest, and mainly, of course, through his magic and his connection to angels. We have a great number of books that still survive of his taking down conversations with angels. He wrote quite a few books, not Many of them, though, were published. I suppose the most famous is this, called Monus Hieroglyphica, first published in 1564. Here's the second edition of it in 1591. And it's all about what you see inside that cosmic egg on the title page, what he would have referred to as the literal signature of the beginning and root of all things, of the universal force of creation from whence all knowledge derives. He called it the Hermetic Seal of London. And this little book goes into every line. There are only 7 lines of it, but he analyzes all the lines, the angles, the points, and he tells us that this contains everything about the creation of the universe. It has the symbols of the alchemical symbols, the symbols of all the planets. It helps to square the circle and show man's relation, therefore, to the divine, the connection of the material world to the divine. And it also goes into the planets and the connection between the planets, the connection in geometrical connection between the moon and the earth, the sun, and also touches upon the septagon, the famous sigil of Aemeth, which is used by Dee to conjure up angels and demons.
So now I'm going to just refer to an expert in the field named Reverend John Barlow Gee. He has an incredible YouTube channel, hundreds of some of the most fascinating videos. He's also an encryptologist and a scholar, and just very rare subject. So he describes how this sigil actually worked that John Dee invented. There's a brief description here.
Now, as we discussed a moment ago, the unpronounceable names of God are derived from rotating the outermost circle of the Sigillum DR Aemeth either clockwise or counterclockwise, according to whether the number appears above the letter or whether the letter appears above the number. Thus, the result would be to yield either a rotation clockwise around the Sigillum DR Aemeth from one letter to the next according to the number given with that letter, or otherwise an opposite rotation around counterclockwise if the letter appeared above the number. Thus, the Sigillum DR Aemeth is meant to be rotated either clockwise or counterclockwise in order to decipher this method of encryption. The earliest known device to utilize this form of method was called the Alberti cipher disk. The Alberti cipher disk, also called formula, is a cipher disk which was described by Leon Battista Alberti in his treatise Decifrus of 1467. The device embodies the first example of polyalphabetic substitution with mixed alphabets in variable period, and is made up of 2 concentric disks attached by a common pin which can rotate one with respect to the other. The larger one is called stabilis, stationary or fixed. The smaller one is called mobilis, movable. The circumference of each disk is divided into 24 equal cells. The outer ring contains one uppercase alphabet for plain text, and the inner ring has a lowercase mixed alphabet for ciphertext. The outer ring also includes the numbers 1 to 4 for the super-encipherment of a code book containing 336 phrases with assigned numerical values. This is a very effective method of concealing the code numbers, since their equivalents cannot be distinguished from the other garbled letters. The sliding of the alphabets is controlled by key letters included in the body of the cryptogram. Likewise, when we compare the Sigillum DR Aemeth to the Alberti cipher disk method of encryption, what we find is that the Sigillum DR Aemeth itself can act as a complex form of cipher disk which includes as many as 4 and at least as few as 3 different levels upon which one can decrypt or encrypt the information based on the letters and numbers comprised therein. Regarding whether or not it can be rotated clockwise or counterclockwise, each of these layers contains at least 2 different types of interpretation for its information, such that there are levels of information for each rotation of each layer. Note that the star-shaped patterns can only be rotated an increment number of times according to the number of corners and sides that each of the patterns itself has. Thus, you can rotate them counterclockwise or clockwise, but you can only rotate the 7 shapes in 7 different ways, and the pentacular shape itself can only be rotated into 5 different positions. The result is such that there are 76 total recombinations for the different positions of the different letters and numbers on the Sigillum DR Aemeth, a genuine cipher disk, despite the fact that Dee's own version of the Sigillum DR Aemeth was actually engraven on wax. This apparent mystery becomes more easily dissoluble when we consider the relationship of the size of Dee's Sigillum DR Aemeth to the size of his crystal ball used for scrying. The method of scrying, or reading through some form of object or another, has been applied throughout the centuries to water, crystals, and other forms of semi-transparent objects. Dee's use of it involved a crystal ball and the ability to read upside down and backwards through the glass conversely. And it was using this method of scrying that Dee comprised his entire Enochian system of encryption and decipherment.